Would you recognize the man who could stop an airline from moving if he was sitting alone by a rainy window, waiting for one cup of coffee that never came? Caleb Morgan sat in the transatlantic Meridian first-class lounge at JFK, his charcoal jacket folded neatly over one arm of the leather chair. Beyond the glass, rain dragged silver lines down the windows. Jets rolled across the wet tarmac, their lights blinking through the gray New York morning. Inside, everything looked expensive and calm. Soft amber lamps, polished chrome, quiet voices, the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries. But calm can lie. Across the room, Denise Parker moved between the tables with a silver coffee pot in one hand and a practiced smile on her face. She was 51, sharp-eyed, careful with her uniform, and proud of knowing who mattered before they had to ask. A white man in a navy blazer lifted two fingers. Denise was there before his cup touched the saucer. "More coffee, Mr. Ellison." He smiled without looking up from his phone. "You're a lifesaver, Denise," she laughed softly. "Long flight ahead." "Well, keep you ready." A few feet away, an older couple in matching beige cashmere asked about pastries. Denise bent slightly at the waist. "Of course I'll bring the warm ones out for you." Then she passed Caleb. Not once, twice. Her eyes brushed over him the way people check a closed door. His face, his hands, his plain black shoes, the leather briefcase by his leg. Then her gaze moved away. No greeting, no coffee, no smile. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. He noticed the small pause before she walked past him, the tightening around her mouth. The question she never said out loud. How did he get in here? He had seen that question before. In private clubs, hotel lobbies, charity dinners where his company had paid for half the room, boardrooms where assistants offered him directions to the service elevator before realizing his name was on the acquisition papers. Caleb did not flinch. He had learned not to give strangers the satisfaction of seeing the wound land. But the body remembers what dignity costs. His fingers rested against the edge of his tablet. On the screen, lines of aviation data moved in clean blue grids: crew assignments, gate timing, fuel windows, baggage chain integrity, dispatch dependencies, the hidden bones of modern air travel. To Denise Parker, he was just a black man sitting too quietly in a room built for people she believed should be recognized. To the airline world, Caleb Morgan was something else entirely. He was 43 years old, founder and chief executive officer of Novragrid Systems, the platform that helped major airlines keep their operations alive. Not the part passengers saw, not the smiles, the champagne, the boarding music, the part underneath, the part that decided whether a crew was legal, whether fuel was approved, whether luggage moved, whether a plane could leave the gate at all, and Transatlantic Meridian Airways. The airline whose lounge had just made him invisible was one of Novagrid's largest clients. Denise returned with a tray of pastries for the cashmere couple. She placed them down like an offering. "Anything else I can get you?" The woman smiled. "You're so kind." Caleb looked up then, just briefly. Denise felt it. Her shoulders tightened for half a second. She almost turned toward him. Almost. Then the overhead speaker chimed, "Transatlantic Meridian Flight 88 to London Heathrow. First-class passengers may now proceed to Gate A17. Caleb closed his tablet slowly, precisely. The sound was soft, but Denise heard it. She finally looked at him, not with warmth, not with apology, but with relief, as if the problem had decided to remove itself. Caleb stood, buttoned his jacket, and picked up his father's old leather briefcase. His reflection followed him in the rain-streaked glass. Tall, calm, unreadable. No one in that lounge knew his name. No one knew the meeting waiting for him in London could shift billions before sunrise. And Denise Parker had no idea that the man she had just ignored was walking toward the first domino gate, as a 17 had the cold brightness of a place where people were sorted before they were seen. Caleb Morgan walked toward the priority lane with his boarding pass glowing on his phone and his briefcase balanced in his left hand. Around him, passengers shifted in wool coats and polished shoes. They checked watches, cleared throats, guarded their place in line, as if boarding first proved something about lives. At the counter stood Patricia Collins. She was 54, with silver blonde hair pulled into a tight twist and reading glasses hanging from a thin chain around her neck. Her uniform was perfect. Her posture was perfect. Her smile, when she chose to use it, was practiced enough to look kind from a distance. She smiled at the white couple ahead of Caleb. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Bradford. London again?" the husband chuckled. Business, sadly. Well, we'll try to make it painless. Patricia scanned their passes and gestured warmly toward the jet bridge. Have a wonderful flight. Then Caleb stepped forward. The smile disappeared. Not slowly, all at once. Boarding pass, sir. Her voice was not openly rude. That was the skill of it. It stayed polished, official, safe enough to deny later. But underneath it was something old and hard. Caleb held out his phone. Patricia scanned it. The machine beeped. Her eyes moved to the screen, then to Caleb, then back down again. Her fingers began tapping. Caleb watched her face, not confusion, calculation. A line formed behind him. Someone sighed. A suitcase wheel squeaked against the floor. Patricia leaned closer to her monitor. There appears to be an issue with your seat assignment. Caleb did not blink. Seat 2A, first class. Confirmed 6 weeks ago. Patricia gave a small breath through her nose. The system is showing a conflict. That is unusual. Yeah, well, we had an aircraft adjustment this morning. Caleb heard the lie before she finished it. Novagrid tracked aircraft adjustments across major carriers in real time. A transatlantic flagship did not change configuration without alerts, crew changes, catering shifts, weight updates, and a dozen system signatures. None had happened. Caleb kept his voice low. What is the new assignment? Patricia tapped twice. Premium economy, seat 24B. The words landed between them. A middle seat. Behind him a man muttered, "Come on!" The Bradfords had paused near the jet bridge entrance, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Caleb looked at Patricia. You released my first-class seat? Patricia straightened. Sir, I am only telling you what the system shows. No, Caleb said. The lane went still. You are telling me what you want me to accept. Color rose in Patricia's cheeks. Her eyes sharpened. She was not used to being challenged in front of people, especially not by someone she had already decided should be grateful to be there at all. From the jet bridge, a senior flight attendant stepped into view. Mark Reynolds was 47, tall, square-shouldered, with a jaw set hard enough to look carved. His uniform fit him like authority. He looked first at Patricia, then at Caleb, and his conclusion arrived quickly. Too quickly. Problem here? Patricia did not take her eyes off Caleb. This passenger is refusing his reassignment. Caleb turned slowly toward Mark. I am questioning why a paid first-class seat was taken from me. Mark smiled without warmth. Sir, we have a schedule to keep. If you've been assigned a seat, please take it. Customer relations can discuss compensation after arrival. This is not about compensation. Mark's smile tightened. It usually is. The sentence hit harder than it should have. For 1 second, Caleb saw the whole machinery of it. Not the airline, not the gate, the deeper system. The one where dignity could be downgraded with a glance. Where a man could pay, prepare, arrive early, follow every rule, and still be treated like an exception that needed correcting. He looked from Patricia to Mark. Neither knew who he was worse. Neither cared to know. A phone lifted behind him. Someone was recording now, not to help, just to capture the delay. Caleb breathed in once. Slowly, he thought of his father's briefcase in his hand, the cracked leather handle, the man who had carried mail through Cleveland winters, and told his son, never beg for respect. Make them answer for the lack of it. Caleb nodded. Fine, he said. I'll take 24B, Patricia exhaled, almost smiling. Mark stepped aside. Caleb walked into the jet bridge without raising his voice. Without looking back, without giving them the scene they expected behind him, Patricia turned to the next passenger with her smile restored. Good morning. Boarding pass, please? She thought the moment was over. It had only just begun. Cat 24B was not a seat. It was a message. Caleb found it halfway down the aircraft, tucked deep in premium economy, between a woman with a neck pillow and a broad-shouldered man, who had already claimed both armrests. Overhead bin slammed above him. A child cried somewhere near the rear. The air smelled of winter coats, reheated coffee, and the quiet irritation of people waiting too long in a narrow tube. The woman on the aisle looked up as Caleb stopped beside her. Oh, she said, pulling one earbud out. That's you. Yes, Mom. She gave a tired smile and stood awkwardly, pressing herself into the aisle while passengers squeezed around her. Caleb stepped in, turned sideways, and lowered himself into the middle seat. His knees touched the seat back in front of him. His briefcase barely fit beneath it. The broad-shouldered man by the window glanced at Caleb's suit, then at his face, then looked away as if even eye contact might invite a conversation he did not want. Caleb fastened his seatbelt. The buckle clicked. It sounded final. Up front, beyond the curtain, first class would be settling into silence. Champagne poured into real glasses. Warm towels placed on small trays. His former seat 2A would have a wide window, soft leather, and room for a man to breathe. Here, his elbows belonged to other people. His dignity, apparently, belonged to airline discretion. No one around him knew what had happened at the gate. No one knew a confirmed first-class passenger had been quietly stripped of the seat he paid for and folded into the back like a clerical error. That was how humiliation often worked, not always with shouting. Sometimes it wore a name tag. Sometimes it smiled. Sometimes it said the system shows and waited for you to swallow the insult whole. The aisle passenger glanced at him. She was in her late 60s with kind eyes and a paperback resting on her lap. "Rough morning?" she asked softly. Caleb turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. Longer than it needed to be, she studied him for a second. Not suspiciously, carefully, like someone old enough to know that not every wound shows blood. "I'm sorry," she said. 2 words, simple, human. They almost reached him. Almost. Before he could answer, Mark Reynolds walked through the cabin curtain and stopped near row 24. He pretended to check overhead bins, but his gaze landed on Caleb. "You all settled now, sir?" The words, "sir," came wrapped in triumph. The aisle woman looked up at Mark, her mouth tightened. Caleb kept his voice even. "I'm seated." "Good," Mark said. "We appreciate your cooperation." Cooperation? As if dignity had been offered a choice. Mark moved on, but Caleb saw the small smile tug at the corner of his mouth before he disappeared behind the curtain again. The plane pushed back from gate A-17. The engines began to whine low at first, then rising through the cabin floor. Passengers surrendered to the rituals of flight. Seatbelts clicked, bags shifted, screens glowed. A baby whimpered and was hushed. Caleb looked down at his hands. They were steady. That surprised even him inside. Something colder than anger was forming, not rage. Rage wasted motion. This was calculation. Clean, sharp, controlled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone before the signal disappeared. He did not call Patricia Collins. He did not call Mark Reynolds. He did not call the customer service line, where some overworked agent would apologize from a script and offer miles as if respect had a loyalty point value. He called Ethan Walker. Ethan answered on the second ring, "Caleb." His voice changed instantly, alert, focused. He knew Caleb never called during boarding unless something was wrong. Caleb kept his eyes forward. "Initiate Protocol Orion on the Transatlantic Meridian account." Silence, not confusion. "Wait, Caleb," Ethan said carefully. "That is a system-wide integrity hold. I know what it is. It has never been used. It is being used now." Ethan's breathing shifted. "Are we compromised?" Caleb looked toward the curtain at the front of the cabin. He heard faint laughter from first class. "Not compromised," he said. "Exposed." Ethan understood enough not to ask the wrong question. "Authorization," Caleb's voice. 7. Full contractual lock, ground operations only, no safety systems, no aircraft in the air. A pause, then keys tapping. Ethan's tone became professional. Surgical. Confirmed. Protocol Orion staging integrity review across scheduling, crew assignment, ground movement, baggage chain, fuel approval, ticketing sync and dispatch clearance. Once executed, Transatlantic Meridian loses right access until manual compliance release. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. He saw Denise's eyes sliding away. Patricia's false concern, Mark's smirk. The passengers watching him shrink so they could stay comfortable. "Execute," Caleb said. At the front of the aircraft, the cabin door sealed with a heavy thud. Ethan whispered, "Done." Caleb ended the call. The first warning appeared in Dallas as a thin amber line on a wall-sized operations screen. Nobody panicked. Not yet. At the Transatlantic Meridian Global Operations Center, night shift analysts sat beneath pale blue lights, watching the airline's nervous system pulse across continents. Every aircraft was a dot. Every crew member was a name in motion. Every route was a thread in a web so large no human being could hold it all without software doing the heavy lifting. Emily Ross noticed it first. She was 32, sharp, tired, and halfway through a cup of coffee gone cold. Her headset pressed a mark into her hair. Her screen showed Flight 12 out of Miami ready for departure. Crew checked in, aircraft fueled, gate open, bags loaded. She clicked dispatch validation. Denied. Emily frowned. That made no sense. She clicked again. Denied. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. That's odd. Across the aisle, a systems coordinator named Luis looked up. What is? Miami just failed. Crew validation. Luis gave a short laugh. Crew time issue. Crew is legal. Captain checked in. First officer checked in. Cabin crew complete? Try again. I did. She tried a third time. Denied. The words sat on the screen, plain and cold. Emily leaned back slowly. A small chill moved up her neck. Airlines were built on permission, not hope, not intention. Permission. Permission to fuel, permission to load, permission to push, permission to turn a waiting aircraft into a living machine. Without that, a plane was just metal with people inside. Hey, Emily called louder now. Anyone else seeing right access errors? For a moment, only the hum of computers answered. Then Luis raised his hand. Fuel approval frozen in Seattle. Another voice came from the far row. Baggage chain locked in Boston. A third analyst turned around. Dispatch clearance not writing in Newark. The room changed. It was subtle at first. Rolling chairs stopped. Keyboard slowed, faces lifted. On the main screen, amber lines became orange. Orange became red. Aircraft dots that had been moving through the systems began to freeze in place one by one, as if an invisible hand had pressed down on the entire airline. Emily's supervisor, Dan Mercer, strode over with paper coffee cup in his hand. Dan was 58 and built like a man who had spent his career pretending pressure did not reach him. What are we looking at? Emily did not take her eyes off the screen. Multiple right access failures. Not isolated. Not regional. Vendor outage. No, read access is fine. We can see everything. Dan leaned closer. Then what can't we do? Emily swallowed. Move anything. That sentence killed the last bit of calm in the room. Dan set his coffee down without drinking it. Get network operations. Get legal. Get Nova Grid on the line now. A banner appeared across the main screen. Integrity review active. Emily stared at the words. She had worked at Transatlantic Meridian for 9 years. She had seen weather shutdowns, cyber drills, fuel delays, crew shortages, and holiday meltdowns that made grown pilots curse into radios. She had never seen those words. Then the count began to climb. 9 aircraft held. 17:59. A young dispatcher near the front whispered, "What is happening?" No one answered. Because the answer was worse than a failure. A failure could be fixed. This looked intentional. In a glass office above the operations floor, Jonathan Pierce, the chief operating officer, arrived with his tie loosened and sleep still caught in his eyes. Someone had called him at home. Someone else had called his driver before he finished the first sentence. He stepped to the edge of the room and stopped. One look at the wall told him this was not a routine outage. Professionals were quiet, in a special way when disaster arrived. Not loud, not frantic, quiet, focused, afraid to waste breath. What failed? Jonathan asked. Dan handed him a tablet. Nothing failed. That's the problem. Jonathan read the screen. Protocol Orion Integrity Hold initiated by Nova Grid Systems. For a second, his face went completely still. Every executive at Transatlantic Meridian knew Nova Grid. Their platform was not a convenience. It was not a dashboard they could replace with a conference call and a whiteboard. It was the spine under the airline skin. Jonathan looked up slowly. Who authorized this? Dan's mouth tightened. Account key belongs to Caleb Morgan. The name dropped into the room like a blade. Emily turned from her station. Pale. Sir, there's also an incident report from JFK. Gate A17. Jonathan stared at her. She continued, her voice smaller. Passenger reassignment. First class to premium economy. Seat 2A to 24B. The room seemed to hold its breath. Emily looked down at the report again. The passenger was Caleb Morgan. No one moved, no one spoke, and 37,000 feet above the Atlantic. Caleb sat in a cramped middle seat, eyes closed, hands folded, while the company that had made him feel powerless began to understand what power really meant. Jonathan Pierce had seen engines fail, crews time out, thunderstorms swallow entire coastlines, and winter storms turn departure boards into fields of red. But he had never seen this. On the operations wall, Transatlantic Meridian stood still. New York, Chicago, Dallas, Atlanta, London, Frankfurt. Planes sat nose out at gates with passengers buckled in and crews ready. The systems could see them. The systems knew the fuel was loaded. The systems knew the captains were legal. They simply would not allow the next step. No smoke, no flames, no alarm bells screaming from the ceiling, just denial. Jonathan's phone rang in his hand before he could decide who to call first. The screen showed Robert Langley, Chief Executive Officer. Jonathan answered, "Robert, what the hell is happening?" Robert's voice was rough with sleep and fear, not the ordinary fear of bad press, something deeper. The kind of fear men get when control leaves the room. We have a network integrity hold. Jonathan said, I have board members calling me from 3 time zones. Tell me it's a glitch. It is not a glitch. Silence. Then what is it? Jonathan looked at the tablet again, though he already knew the answer. Novagrid initiated Protocol Orion. The line went quiet. Then Robert said one word. Why? Jonathan turned toward the glass office overlooking the operations floor. Down below, Emily Ross stood at her console, pale, reading the JFK incident report line by line. Every few seconds, her expression tightened, as if the document itself were ashamed. Jonathan lowered his voice because our people at JFK downgraded Caleb Morgan from first class to premium economy. For a few seconds, Robert said nothing. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The arrogance was gone. The corporate polish was gone too. Caleb Morgan was on one of our flights. Yes. Which flight? Flight 88 to London, gate 17, and we moved him. Yes. To where? Jonathan swallowed. Seat 24B. The quiet on the line felt physical. Jonathan could picture Robert in his house in Connecticut, standing barefoot on polished hardwood. Suddenly understanding that this wasn't a difficult passenger, not a celebrity complaint, not some viral inconvenience they could bury under a careful statement. They had offended the man whose company held the keys to their operation. Robert's voice returned lower now. Get me every record from that gate. Scanner logs, audio, camera, employee notes, everything already pulling it, and find out who touched the decision. Jonathan glanced at Emily. She looked up from the incident report. Gate agent Patricia Collins entered the override. Senior flight attendant Mark Reynolds confirmed the reassignment. Jonathan repeated the names. Robert's tone turned cold. Put them on administrative leave immediately. Jonathan almost laughed, but there was no humor left in the building. Robert with respect. Administrative leave is not going to restart 152 aircraft. Across the room, Louise called out, Frankfurt is requesting manual override. Another dispatcher answered before Jonathan could move, denied. Someone else shouted, Heathrow Gate Control wants an estimated recovery time. Emily looked up again. Social media is moving. Passengers in Seattle and Boston are posting videos. The tag Meridian freeze is already spreading. Jonathan shut his eyes for half a second. This was how modern disasters spread. Not through official statements, through tired passengers with phones, through business travelers trapped in leather seats, through grandmothers missing connections, through pilots forced to tell cabins they had no update because headquarters had none either. Robert said, Call Caleb. He is in the air, then call Novagrid. We did. Their legal team says all inquiries must go through contractual emergency channels. Robert cursed under his breath. Jonathan looked back at the wall. Red markers multiplied across the network like blood under skin. Robert, he said quietly. This is not only technical, this is leverage. No, Robert snapped. This is a hostage situation. Jonathan's face hardened. No, he said. This is a consequence. The word surprised even him. But once spoken, they filled the room. For years, Jonathan had sat through training decks about customer dignity, implicit bias, brand trust, and service culture. He had approved slogans, signed memos, nodded through presentations, but at real gates on real mornings, under pressure. The old instinct still leaked through the polished surface, and now the bill had arrived. Emily stepped closer, holding up her headset. Sir, Media Relations says CNBC is asking whether the shutdown is connected to a discrimination incident at JFK. Jonathan felt the floor tilt. Robert heard it through the phone. What did she say? Jonathan stared at the frozen aircraft on the wall. I think he said the world just found out before we did. At 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, Caleb Morgan sat in seat 24B, eyes open now, listening to the soft engine hum around him. Everyone on that plane thought they were still on schedule. They were wrong. The cabin lights over the Atlantic had dimmed to a soft blue, the kind meant to make strangers forget they were packed shoulder to shoulder inside a machine crossing dark water. Caleb Morgan did not sleep. He sat upright in seat 24B, hands folded over his lap, his shoulders still, his breath slow. The woman on the aisle had opened her paperback again, but she had not turned a page in several minutes. She kept glancing at him, not with curiosity now, but with concern. The man by the window had fallen asleep with his mouth slightly open, his shoulder leaning into Caleb's space. Each time the aircraft trembled, his arm pressed harder against Caleb's sleeve. Caleb did not move him. He had spent a lifetime learning the difference between discomfort and danger. Discomfort could be endured. Danger had to be answered. A young flight attendant came down the aisle with a tray of water cups. She was in her late 20s with red hair, pulled into a neat knot, and tired green eyes that had seen enough of the cabin to know when something was wrong. Her name tag read Lily Adams. She stopped at Caleb's row. "Sir," she said quietly, "would you like some water?" Caleb opened his eyes. "Yes, thank you." She handed the cup to him with both hands, careful not to spill. Her gaze dropped to his suit, then to the tight space around his knees, then back to his face. Something shifted in her expression. Not suspicion, recognition, not of his name, of the situation. "Long flight," she said softly. Caleb took the cup, longer for some than others. Lily's lips parted as if she wanted to say more. Then she glanced toward the curtain at the front of the cabin and stopped herself. In airline work, compassion often had to survive inside rules. She knew that. Caleb knew it too. "I'll be nearby if you need anything," she said. That small kindness stayed with him longer than it should have. Behind the curtain, first class murmured with insulated ease. A laugh rose low and comfortable. Glass touched glass. Someone asked for another pillow. Mark Reynolds' voice answered warmly. "Of course, right away." Caleb looked down at the cup in his hand. The water trembled slightly, not from turbulence, from him. For the first time that night, anger reached his fingers. He tightened his grip until the plastic bent. Then the captain's voice came over the spear, smooth and unaware. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising comfortably across the Atlantic. We expect an on-time arrival into London Heathrow." Caleb lifted his eyes toward the ceiling on time. The words almost made him smile, because somewhere far below in glass offices and operation centers, men in expensive suits were learning that arrival was not the same as control. A few rows ahead, a businessman refreshed his phone through the onboard fee. He frowned at the screen. "Huh?" he muttered. The aisle woman lowered her book. "Something wrong?" The man turned halfway around, eager for an audience. "Looks like Meridian is having some kind of system meltdown." Caleb brought the water to his lips. The woman beside him paused. "What kind of meltdown?" The businessman squinted. "Flights grounded everywhere. Dallas, Boston, Seattle. People are posting from gates. Says 152 aircraft are on hold." The number moved through nearby rows like a draft under a door. 152. Someone whispered, "Is it weather?" "No," says operational system lock. The aisle woman looked at Caleb. She did not know why, she just did. Some human instincts arrive before facts. Caleb took one slow sip. The tourist across the aisle leaned in. "Can you imagine being stuck on the ground right now?" Caleb looked past her toward the curtain that divided the cabin. His voice was quiet. "Some people were stuck long before the planes were." The woman on the aisle heard him. Her eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed to understand that the story was larger than travel delays, larger than one seat, larger than one man. Up front, Mark Reynolds stood in the forward galley beside the espresso machine, arms folded, pretending not to feel the tremor moving through first class. At first, he thought it was weather. Then a passenger in a cream cashmere wrap held up her phone. "Excuse me," she said. "Why is every Meridian flight out of Dallas showing canceled or delayed?" Mark took the phone. His smile stayed in place for half a second. Then it began to disappear. Across the screen was a financial news headline. "Transatlantic Meridian operations frozen after reported discrimination incident at JFK." Mark read it once, then again, JFK. His throat tightened. The word reported sat there like a loaded gun. "I'm sure it's only a temporary system issue," he said, handing the phone back too quickly. The woman narrowed her eyes. "It says discrimination." Mark forced a smile, but his palm was damp now, and somewhere behind the curtain in seat 24B, the man he had dismissed sat perfectly still as the truth began moving faster than the aircraft. Flight 88 began its descent into London under a sky the color of wet steel. The seatbelt sign chimed. Window shades lifted one by one. Gray morning light spread across tired faces, catching the fine lines around eyes that had not slept well. The engine softened, the aircraft tilted. Somewhere below, Heathrow waited in mist and concrete. But inside the cabin, the quiet had changed. It was no longer the ordinary quiet of landing. It was the silence of people reading the same news and slowly realizing they were inside it. In first class, phones glowed in nervous hands. A man in a tailored blue suit kept refreshing a financial news page as if a different headline might appear if he pushed hard enough. A woman whispered to her husband that their connecting flight had been canceled. Another passenger said 152 aircraft, and the number moved through the cabin like a cough no one could suppress. Mark Reynolds stood in the forward galley, one hand braced against the counter. He had read 3 articles now. All said the same thing: operational freeze, JFK incident, first-class downgrade, possible racial bias. He tried to tell himself it could be someone else. JFK was large. Gate A-17 handled many flights. Problems happened every day. Passengers complained. Media exaggerated. But his stomach knew the truth before his mind accepted it. Seat 2A, Seat 24B, Caleb Morgan. The name had not been in the first headline. Now it was everywhere, founder and CEO of Nova Grid Systems. The words seemed to drain the air from his lungs. Mark looked toward the cabin curtain. Beyond it, somewhere in premium economy, sat the man he had smiled down at. The man he had told to take the seat and discuss compensation later. The man he had decided was not worth knowing. His hands felt cold. In row 24, the aisle woman had her phone in both hands. Her paperback lay forgotten on her lap. "Oh, my lord," she whispered. Caleb turned slightly. "Mom," she looked at him. Really looked at him this time. The suit, the stillness, the face she had mistaken for quiet sadness when it had been control. Her voice lowered. "Are you Caleb Morgan?" The broad-shouldered man by the window opened his eyes. "What?" The woman swallowed. "It says here, the system hold is tied to a passenger downgrade from first-class JFK to London, seat 2A to 24B. The words froze the row. The man by the window sat up straighter, pulling his shoulder away from Caleb, as if space itself had suddenly become owed. The woman's eyes filled with shame. "Were you supposed to be up there?" Caleb did not answer right away. He looked toward the curtain, then toward the small plastic cup still sitting on his tray table, empty now, crushed slightly at the rim. Before he could speak, Lily Adams appeared in the aisle. She was pale. She held a cabin tablet close to her chest with both hands. Her lips pressed together, then parted. "Mr. Morgan." The nearby rows went silent. The name traveled without announcement. Mr. Morgan, Caleb Morgan. People turned their heads closely, carefully. The way people look at a person after discovering they have been standing near a storm without hearing thunder. Caleb looked up at Lily. "Yes," she breathed in. Her voice stayed respectful, but he could hear the tremor beneath it. "The captain would like to speak with you after landing. Corporate leadership has contacted the flight deck." The aisle woman covered her mouth. The man by the window muttered, "Oh God." Lily kept her eyes on Caleb. "I'm sorry, sir. It was not an official apology. It was not scripted. It was just a young woman saying what the room should have said hours ago." Caleb nodded once. "Tell the captain I'll speak with him when we are parked at the gate." "Yes, sir." That "sir" was different, not procedural, earned. Up front, Mark heard Lily say the name. He did not move. He stared at the galley wall, listening to his own heartbeat thud in his ears. For the first time all night, he remembered Caleb's face clearly, not as a delay, not as a problem, as a warning he had chosen not to read. The aircraft touched down hard enough to make the overhead bins rattle. No one clapped. Reverse thrust roared through the cabin. London rolled past, in strips of gray runway and flashing lights. Passengers held their phones without speaking. Some recorded, some stared forward, some looked ashamed, though shame was late and did not know where to sit. Caleb remained still until the plane slowed. His hands were folded, his breathing was even, but everyone around him felt the change. He was no longer the man in the middle seat. He was the reason the entire airline was waiting. The aircraft door opened into a silence that did not belong to an airport. It was heavier than that. Passengers stood in the aisle with bags half lifted and phones still glowing in their hands. No one pushed forward. No one complained about tight connections. Even the people who always rushed the door seemed to understand that something larger than baggage was blocking the exit. Caleb Morgan rose from seat 24B. The aisle woman stepped back to let him pass. Her face was drawn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb paused. "For what?" She swallowed for not seeing it sooner. He looked at her for a moment. There was no anger in his eyes. That made it harder for her. "That's what survives," he said. "When decent people notice too late, then he moved forward." Each step up the aisle felt louder than it should have. Shoes against carpet, the soft scrape of his briefcase, the low breathing of passengers watching him pass. At the front of the aircraft, Mark Reynolds stood beside the galley, with both hands clasped in front of him. His face had lost its color. The man who had seemed so certain at JFK now looked smaller inside the same uniform. "Mr. Morgan," Mark began, his voice cracking so slightly. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding." Caleb stopped. The cabin tightened. Phones lifted again. Not high, not obvious, but enough. People wanted a record now. Perhaps for justice, perhaps for guilt, perhaps for themselves. "A misunderstanding requires two people to be confused," Caleb said. "I was never confused." Mark blinked. His throat moved. "Sir, I was following information provided by the gate." "No," Caleb said. "You were following a story you already believed." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Mark's eyes dropped for the first time. Caleb continued, his voice calm enough to cut. "You looked at me and decided I was asking for something I had not earned." The first-class cabin was silent behind him. A man who had laughed earlier stared down at his shoes. A woman clutched her phone with both hands. Lily Adams stood near the curtain, eyes wet, watching the moment settle into the walls of the aircraft. From the cockpit doorway, Captain Harold Bennett appeared, with his hat tucked under one arm. He was in his early 60s, silver hair, careful expression, the face of a man briefed by lawyers before the parking brake was set. "Mr. Morgan," he said, "corporate leadership is waiting in the jet bridge. They are asking to speak with you immediately." Caleb looked past him. Through the open door, he saw them. Dark suits, tight faces, a woman holding a legal folder against her chest. Airport security standing too straight. A communications officer checking her phone with shaking hands. Consequences wore expensive shoes. Caleb stepped into the jet bridge. The air was colder there. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rain tapped faintly against the glass panels, blurring Heathrow into silver streaks. A tall man in a navy suit moved forward fast, then stopped himself from getting too close. "Mr. Morgan, Jonathan Pierce, Chief Operating Officer." Caleb kept walking. Jonathan followed beside him, careful to match his pace. His face looked older than it should have, carved by hours of disaster. "On behalf of Transatlantic Meridian, I want to offer our deepest apology." Caleb stopped so suddenly, Jonathan nearly stumbled. Apology for what? Jonathan hesitated for the improper reassignment. The phrase died in the air. Caleb turned to him. A printer can be improperly assigned. A baggage cart can be improperly routed. A man is not improperly reassigned when your employees look at his skin and decide his ticket is negotiable. Jonathan went still. Behind him, the legal officer lowered her eyes. Caleb continued down the jet bridge toward the terminal lights. Outside the glass, cameras were already gathering. Word had crossed the ocean faster than the plane. Jonathan tried again, softer now. "Robert Langley is ready to speak with you. He wants to resolve this." "Resolve," Caleb said. He looked through the glass at the wet airport beyond. That's what companies call it when they want the pain to stop before the truth is finished. His phone lit in his hand. "Ethan Walker." Caleb answered. Ethan's voice was calm. "Full hold remains active. No safety systems affected. Ground operations still frozen. Board channels requesting release authority." Caleb looked at Jonathan, then back toward the aircraft, where Mark Reynolds stood in the doorway like a man watching his future disappear. "Do not release," Caleb said. Jonathan's face collapsed. Caleb ended the call and walked toward the waiting executives. Every step sounded like a verdict. Robert Langley appeared on the conference screen from New York, but even through glass and pixels, fear was visible on his face. He was 61, polished, gay-haired, and used to managing storms from above them. Earnings calls, union disputes, lawsuits, fuel spikes, public relations disasters. He knew how to soften blame and redirect anger. He knew how to wait for people to get tired. But this was different. This storm had a name. Caleb Morgan sat at the end of a narrow executive room inside Heathrow's private services wing. Rain traced crooked lines down the windows behind him. Across from him sat Jonathan Pierce, two attorneys, a crisis communications director, and a regional vice president who had not spoken since Caleb entered. They had offered coffee. He had refused. They had offered privacy. He had looked toward the phones already recording beyond the glass and said, "Privacy is what your employees counted on." Now Robert leaned toward the camera. "Caleb," he began, I want to say personally that I am deeply sorry. Caleb did not answer. Robert swallowed. What happened at JFK does not reflect who we are as a company. Caleb lifted his eyes. It reflects exactly who you are when no one important is watching. The room went still. Jonathan lowered his gaze to the table. The communications director stopped typing. Robert's jaw tightened, but he controlled it. We are prepared to offer a full refund, significant compensation, lifetime top-tier status, and a public apology. Caleb looked at him with a calm that made the offer sound smaller than it was. You are trying to buy back embarrassment, he said. I am here to discuss accountability. One of the attorneys leaned forward. She was in her 40s, precise, careful, exhausted. Mr. Morgan, with respect, Protocol Orion is creating enormous operational harm. Thousands of passengers who had nothing to do with this incident are being affected. Caleb turned to her. I agree. That surprised her, he continued. Innocent passengers should not suffer because your company built a culture where dignity depends on appearance. That is why this conversation should move quickly. Robert's voice hardened. What do you want? For the first time, Caleb placed a folder on the table. The sound was soft. Everyone heard it. My team prepared this before I landed. He said, Novigrid Legal has attached the emergency integrity clause. Ethan Walker has attached the system logs. Your own scanner records confirm the reassignment. Jonathan's face tightened. Caleb opened the folder but did not look down. 3 conditions. No one moved. First, Patricia Collins and Mark Reynolds are terminated today. Not transferred, not quietly retrained. Terminated for discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and falsifying the nature of a passenger issue. The regional vice president flinched. Caleb continued. Second, Robert Langley will issue a public statement within the hour. Not customer experience language, not vague regret. You will name what happened. Racial bias, abuse of authority, wrongful downgrade. The communications director went pale. Within the hour, Caleb looked at her. She stopped talking. Third, Caleb said, Transatlantic Meridian will fund a $50 million independent passenger dignity and anti-bias program over 10 years. Independent oversight, annual public reporting, mandatory de-escalation certification for gate agents, flight attendants, supervisors, and captains. Robert stared from the screen. You want to dictate our internal culture? No, Caleb said. Your internal culture brought us here. I want outside accountability. The attorney opened her mouth, then closed it. Robert leaned back. You are asking me to humiliate my own company, Caleb stood slowly. No, he said. Your company did that at gate A17. I am asking you to tell the truth about it. Outside the room, cameras flashed against the glass, hidden side. The air felt thin. Jonathan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked like a man finally tired of defending a machine that had harmed people while claiming to serve them. Then he spoke the first honest sentence anyone from the airline had offered all day. Robert, he said quietly, we should accept. Robert looked at him through the screen. Jonathan, we should accept, Jonathan repeated. Not because we are cornered, because he is right. The room changed again. Not repaired, not forgiven, but pierced by something true. Caleb looked at Jonathan for a long moment. He saw fear there, yes, but also shame. Real shame. The kind that might still become responsibility if it was not buried under legal wording. Robert closed his eyes. When he opened them, his voice was lower. Send the documents. Caleb did not sit back down. They are already in your inbox. Robert's screen reflected in the conference table like a cold window. He nodded once, then we sign. Robert Langley signed, because there was no cleaner way out. The agreement went through in a quiet room at Heathrow while rain tapped against the glass. No one smiled. No one shook hands. The attorneys reviewed each line, then reviewed it again. Jonathan Pierce stood near the window, arms folded, watching planes sit motionless under the gray London sky. Caleb Morgan waited, not impatiently, precisely. Across the world, passengers were still stuck at gates. Parents were calming children. Crews were answering questions they could not fully explain. Pilots were sitting in cockpits with fuel loaded and nowhere to go. Caleb knew that. He felt the weight of it. Power used correctly was never light in the hand. Then Robert's public statement went live. Not from a junior spokesperson, not from a nameless corporate account. Robert appeared on camera himself, seated beneath the blue Transatlantic Meridian logo. His face looked older than it had that morning. At JFK, he said, his voice controlled but strained. Our employees wrongfully downgraded Mr. Caleb Morgan from his paid first-class seat after treating him through the lens of racial bias. They abused their authority. They failed him. They failed our passengers, and they failed the values we claim to represent. The words fast, screens lit up in terminals. News anchors repeated them. Passengers who had been angry at delays went quiet when they understood why the planes had stopped. In New York, Patricia Collins sat his snack a back office with her badge on the table. Her hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. She kept saying she had followed the system, but the scanner log said otherwise. The override had her name on it. At Heathrow, Mark Reynolds received the call in a crew room with a paper cup of coffee cooling in front of him. First he argued, then he blamed the gate. Then his voice broke. "I didn't know who he was," he said. The manager on the line answered softly. That was the problem. Mark sat down. For the first time, he understood that the issue was never Caleb's title. It was the way he had treated him before knowing it. Back in the conference room, Jonathan approached Caleb with the signed confirmation. "Terminations are complete," he said. "The public statement is out. The Passenger Dignity Fund is announced. Independent oversight begins within 30 days. Caleb looked at him, and the training mandatory. Gate agents, flight attendants, supervisors, captains, annual certification, public reporting. Caleb studied Jonathan's face. There was no victory there, only exhaustion, and maybe the beginning of honesty. Caleb called Ethan Walker. Ethan answered before the first ring finished. "Ready?" Caleb looked out at the runway. A line of aircraft waited beneath the low clouds. Silver body still impatient. Begin restoration across continents. Screens shifted red to amber, amber to green. Crew validations cleared, fuel approvals synchronized, baggage chains unlocked, dispatch permissions reopened. One by one, the airline began breathing again. Not all at once, carefully, deliberately, like a bod pulled from deep water. By nightfall, Transatlantic Meridian was flying again. But it was not the same company. It could never pretend to be. The old sickness had been named in public. That mattered. Not because words fixed everything, but because silence protected everything. Caleb left Heathrow through a side exit just after sunset. No speech, no celebration, no raised fist for the cameras. Just a man in a charcoal suit carrying his father's old briefcase toward a waiting car. A reporter called from behind the barrier, "Mr. Morgan, is it worth it?" Caleb stopped. For a moment, the airport noise softened around him. He thought of Denise looking past him, Patricia taking his seat away with a polite voice. Mark smiling like dignity was optional. He thought of every person asked to prove they belonged in a place they had already earned. Then he turned slightly. "It will be worth it," he said, "if the next person does not have to make the same call." He got into the car and the door closed softly. Behind him, planes rose into the dark, carrying people across oceans, across borders, across lives, and somewhere inside that movement was a warning no company could afford to ignore. Dignity is not an upgrade. It is the price of doing business with human beings. If this story made you think of someone who was treated like they did not belong, leave a comment with the words "respect matters." And if you believe stories like this still need to be told, stay with us for the next.